Also, thanks, Alan, for the invite. So we're going to talk about lean handover. When I did this in 2007, I came from a background of writing change orders and project management and muddy boots civil engineering. And I encountered problems like this, and you've seen my buddy Lyle a lot of times. If you don't know the jokes about this picture, you can come see me during the break. There's a couple of pretty funny stories about this guy. But then it comes out of those boxes and it goes into bookcases that look like this. And the bookcases, the stuff in there is really of no value because the first time anything gets used, it gets stuffed in the back of the truck, right? You can go around, and this is the kind of things that I look at when I look at buildings. 3 different tags on this piece of equipment. So you can imagine 3 different people being paid to do every piece of equipment in this building. And this building is actually the facility management office of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. So they can't even get this stuff right. The contractors tag is particularly interesting because it's mounted on both the cover plate and the unit. So the first time it's maintained, the big tag, the expensive one there, will even break off. And if you go look at the databases that facility managers and asset managers have, you're going to see that because there's no sort of central correct information, everybody ends up sitting there and typing all the information in, so the information is incorrect. And in one hospital I looked at, you could see the numbers of rooms and the different categories didn't match up. More than that, 30% of the categories did not even match up. So who knows who had the keys to which room? It's a very confusing situation. And I'll tell you the number 16. That's the number of separate database systems to manage ports and airports and railroads at the Port of Seattle in Seattle, Washington. They have 16 different of these things. And this is the reality. So when you think about delivering this information correctly, you have to consider where it's going to go and what they're going to do with it. Now, when I first did this, it took me about 8 years to turn it into the U.S. National BIM standard, version 3. So I heard some people talking yesterday that we were talking about BS 1192, and it talks all about COBie. Well, it actually doesn't. There's only one sentence in that whole document that references this. This is the technical standard for COBie, okay? And you can get a free copy, nationalbimstandard.org. It's a U.S. consensus standard. 1,500 people reviewed this and voted on it. And inside here, of course, there's a lot of technical stuff about IFC and model view definition, but there's also some very important things. If you haven't seen this, there's a clear statement of the business case in 27 different phases during the project. There's a very clear dictionary about what everything means, and it's mapping back to IFC if you choose to use that. And to me, as a former project engineer, construction manager kind of guy, the quality control requirements for what's to be delivered during design and construction and exactly how to test it are in the standard. So a lot of people say, well, I got this thing and I don't know what to do with it. Well, test it, because the rules for testing are part of the standard. Just like if you have the concrete specification, the concrete standard in your country, it includes how to test it. There's actually certified testing machines. I wrote one, and you can get that that meet this requirement. And then there's different ways to look at the information, right? Because who cares what the format is? It's the information that's important. So you can look at it in a spreadsheet, or you could look at it in a step file. And so the specification for looking at it in things other than step physical file format, step part 21, which people incorrectly call IFC file, that's just a format, not the content. So if we go back and then look at how this happens, I spent many years bench testing over 30 different software products. But because it was a bench test, it was myself and the people that wrote the software doing the testing. And that's not often the best kind of test. When I left government service, one of the first things I wanted to do was actually demonstrate with real architects and engineers how this actually works and provide a cookbook, if you will. So I started on the design side, and we picked this little building, and we modeled it as if it were a big building. We have every discipline is modeled. It's not a toy, it's a real simulated project. And what our objective was to make sure the data matched the drawings. Because until you have the data matching the drawings, as one of the previous speakers said, the information that you have is really not any good, right? It's just, it's not what you contract for, and that's what people get paid to do. So things that look like this is actually the design requirement for COBie, is to take the finished schedules and put them in a format that other people can use. It's as simple as that for COBie. So I worked with Bond Bryan Architects and Rob Jackson to do the book on the architectural programming side. And then worked with MMA. Sean, are you here? Sean is not here. Worked with MMA as well as Emma Hooper. Some of you probably have seen her in the UK. She now works with Rob to develop this model out through all phases of MEP. So these are the cookbooks, but it only covers the design side. What about the construction side? Because this is always the issue. People say, well, it's great, but how do you do it, right? So on the construction side, the artifacts that we're looking at are not things like schedules. They're things that look like this. You're never going to find this in a BIM model. But for some reason, people think COBie during construction is all about BIM. COBie during construction is about the manufacturer's model number, the product data sheets, the job plans, the spare parts, the warranties. That stuff is never going to go in a model. It's not for that purpose. You can't find those properties there. So the question is, how do you use this stuff and make a cookbook? And what people typically do is they get the stuff at the end of the project, and they hire a subcontractor who recreates all the stuff that's already been recreated, and you sit there and type it in. That's not the intention of what I had in mind in 2007 when I first published COBie. What I had in mind was all of that information comes from somewhere. And when that information is first created, it should be captured. And then nobody has to do any of it. In fact, if you do it correctly, you don't even have to do the end of the project job crawl and go in to write down all the manufacturer and model numbers and nameplate data, because you already have that, because you already knew that up front. So this was the real purpose of COBie. So just to give you an example, this is, there's a paper, and I'll show you a copy of the paper. So this is described in the paper a little bit. This and many other forms are described in the book. So this is a kind of standard transmittal form. It's going to look different for different clients. And the format here is really arbitrary, but what I want to point out to you is that most of the information in this form can be automatically generated if you have correct COBie data to begin with, because what is it? It's just a list of stuff that the contractor is going to install. From the point of view of COBie, that's all it is. This whole part of the form can be automatically generated. This is the only part the contractor needs to pay attention to. So if your objective is to capture the manufacturer name and model number and all the product data that goes along with it, why not capture it when the contractor first gets it approved instead of waiting to the end and hiring somebody else? But the question is how? And the answer is you change the form that people use. You don't tell them to use COBie, because who wants to learn about a data standard that some wacky guy that works in a cornfield had to figure out? What people know is a form like this. So let them use the form and do the job and capture the data when it actually is important, when they're going to get paid for that work. So this is the whole idea. And this is just one of several forms. This is the paper. You're going to find it in the proceedings. It describes really just some experience with that specific form and how issues about testing it. The book is here, and as I said, real people do this. So there were two MEP subcontractors, one in the US that did the plumbing and one in the UK. it was very important to me to have a UK-based co-author. Some of you may have seen John Ford. He's a guy that works for Galliford Try in the UK. So he and I made sure that this book covers issues about the how in the US and the UK, because people think it's really different. But it turns out it's just a matter of there's more traditional design, bid, build projects in the US, and in the UK there are more design, build projects. So we talk about both of those situations in the book. And you can see what people said about it. For those of you in the back, one of the MEP subcontractors said, it's simple and it's just something we overlook on a daily basis, that we already use and capture this information. So let's just take advantage of it. Another MEP subcontractor basically said the same thing. It's doing what you're doing today, just using a different form. And if you're the owner, you didn't even tell the person to deliver COBie. You give them the forms. If it's design, bid, build, you give them the forms. They're already filled out. They just put their data in, and then you get it. Doesn't cost you anything. The contractor's going to do it anyway because it's part of the submittal process or the other processes that are identified in the book. And someone who's associated with the UK BIM Alliance said that this is the missing link in UK BIM adoption. So this is not my words. This is somebody that's at that group. So if we want to do this and do something different, we kind of have to go, see what that looks like, right? And if the vision is not quite clear, you go and you sit in this machine and they say A or B, right? So what I want to show you is, instead of this, what could be done? And I'll show you after that exactly where you can see how I've done that. So to get the stuff in the paper boxes, this is the form you use. And you can eliminate almost all of the paper boxes with this form and other forms. Standard contract administration process, updated to capture the information as you go. That's how it gets in there. Now, the guy has a little notepad. So instead of having the notepad, do you need an enterprise thing and bespoke iPads, and that if somebody breaks, it's going to cost you a couple of $100s to replace? No. You use open source applications that everybody has a phone in their back pocket, can use it. When they install a piece of equipment, that's how you have them fill in the daily report about what equipment was installed, and then you have the serial number and the installation date. There's no need to go and do a job crawl afterwards, right? The guy that installs it is the guy that knows when it was installed. Why check it? Why recreate that information? So you can see examples of this as well. And then what might the whole thing look like when you're done? Instead of the books up on the wall, it might simply look like a website where you have access to all the linked information. And you can either search it by, I have a pump I need to figure something out about, or there's a leak in a specific room, and because of the way COBie is organized, all of the data is cross-referenced. So this is just another view of something that you think looks really complicated on a spreadsheet. And again, if you want to see what this looks like, you can go to where all of the files for all of these books are publicly available and see for yourself, okay? prairieskyconsulting.com/testing. I would encourage you to take a look at that. So thanks for your time, and I'll turn it back to John now.